I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Brent Wilson, who directed the documentary feature Brian Wilson, Long Promised Road. You know what, Brent? As soon as we hear good vibrations in the first few minutes of the film, with all these industry luminaries talking about it, I was immediately transported. I'm so glad you opened the film this way. Like, I could honestly listen to that song all day, like many of Brian's tracks. And I was thinking it must have been a no-brainer for you to open the film this way, right?
It absolutely was. It seemed that way to me. And I'm so glad to hear you say that because that was exactly the idea. I wanted to pull in the audience from the very first, frame if I could. And I think that track is Brian's masterpiece. And, I think when you make a film like this, one of your goals is you also, you want to attract maybe fans or people who may know a little bit about Brian, a little bit about the Beach Boys, and maybe kind of bring them to the story. And I think that's a song that most people would hear and go, oh, I know that song. Or, I didn't know, what the name of it was, but at least I know it. And then, yeah, hopefully you grab them and you pull them in. And then if you're lucky, you never let them go.
Yeah, it was our way in, and then I was like, okay, I'm now ready to take this journey with Brian. So for people who haven't seen the film yet, it sheds new light on the life and music, of course, of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. And you know what? I thought I knew quite a bit about him, but I was amazed at how much I actually didn't know and how much this film shed light on him. Why did you decide you wanted to take a deep dive into his story?
Yeah, it was. There's a great quote at the beginning of Sir Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, and I'm going to screw up the quote, but it was like, no man's story can be encompassed in one telling. And I think that's a beautiful quote. And he says that before I think it's like a 5-hour film on Gandhi's life. But he's so right? I don't think any man's life, your life, my life, anyone's life could be encompassed in one telling, and certainly not in Brian Wilson's life. I think his life is just is dynamic and is so remarkable that there was still room. And I was actually at a concert. I'm a fan, a big fan, and I was at a concert. My wife bought me a ticket and we had a really nice seat up front right after Love and Mercy had come out. And it was on his birthday. And it was on his birthday. And at a point during the concert, they brought out a birthday cake, and all of his children and grandchildren came out and surrounded him at the piano and sang happy birthday. And I sat there in the audience and I thought to myself, my God, how did that man get to this place in his life? If you know just the smallest thread about Brian Wilson, you know that that's a bit of a miracle, that here he was at 75, 76 years old, playing to a sold out Greek theater, and he's surrounded by kids and grandkids. And it was just a remarkable moment. I just kind of sat there and kind of let it kind of wash over me as a fan. And then the filmmaker in me said, you know what? I wonder if there's there's still a little more to be told. And the journey really kind of began with that moment.
It makes a lot of sense when you look back at your credits. Like you've done a lot of non-narrative work, but more like informational or documentary feature work about music artists and about that industry. It makes sense for you to tackle this particular subject. But I've always known Brian Wilson to be a tough interview, and I guess that's become cliche these days because a lot of people in the media are saying that in the lead up to this film being released. So you decided to do it as a more intimate, candid, and maybe nostalgic reminiscing of his life as he talks to his dear friend Jason Fine. I thought that was really a really genius way to set the film up, but I'm just wondering how that concept came to you to tackle the story in that way.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it certainly didn't begin that way. And, I've been thinking about it since kind of all this began and the film has come out. And I'm like, well, what in the world made me think I could interview Brian Wilson? And I don't know if I was being gullible or if I was just being arrogant, or I don't know I still don't know what made me think I could do it. And, but needless to say, I failed miserably. And there's a little snippet of that at the beginning of the film. And and it's just only a minute long, but I interviewed Brian for 50 minutes that day. And I kept, when I finished, I thought my career was over. I was like, that's it. I'll never work again. This film's a complete failure, and I'm done. And so I spoke to Jean Sievers, Brian's publicist, and she had recommended I talk to Jason Fine, who was an editor of Rolling Stone and who had interviewed Brian for many, many years, been covering the Beach Boys. And she had said that Brian and Jason had become friends. So I went back and I reread some of Jason's work before our phone call. And there was one article in particular, it was called Brian Wilson's Better Days. It was in Rolling Stone. And it was just this beautiful article about how Jason had spent a few days with Brian driving around LA. They went to the movies and saw the Wrecking Crew documentary. They went and had sushi and had a few beers. And Brian just kind of seemed to, I read things in that interview that I'd never heard Brian say before. And I thought to myself, that's the movie I want to see. I want to see Brian relaxed and hanging out and cruising around LA, his home, which is the only place he's ever lived. Brian lives now, 15 miles from where he was born. And, very few of us can say that. And so LA's been his entire life. And so I thought, what, that's the movie I want to see. And so we spoke to Jason, and Jason made the mistake of saying on the phone call, well, I'll do anything I can to help. And after he said that, I was like, well, I got this crazy idea. I said, let's put some cameras in a car. Let's load up some music on the iPod, and let's turn you guys loose. And he's like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And that was essentially how it began. It was a real leap of faith. And our producers, Teresa Page, Tim Headington, fortunately allowed us to take that leap of faith.
Yeah, and thank you to Jason Fine for being such a good sport in agreeing to go on the journey with him, because he did bring out something new and kind of fresh about Brian that I thought I'd seen it all. And as I said earlier, I really hadn't scratched the surface in what I knew about him, particularly his mental health struggles. You know what? I'm going to be really open here. I can't tell you how much it means to me, and I would suggest countless others, to watch and listen to someone we admire talk about and deal with mental health issues and mental illness, whether it be anxiety, depression, or whatever it may be. Was there ever much reluctance to reveal too much about that very private side of his life?
There was. The first thing that Jason and I did is we took, if you will, kind of a Hippocratic oath, which was we would do no harm. And that was our only rule. It was like, if Brian wanted to talk about something, we would talk about it and we would show it. But if Brian didn't want to talk about something, then we wouldn't push him on it, and we just wouldn't go there. So we just always kind of followed that oath, if you will, to do no harm. And if Brian would open up and reveal himself, terrific. If he didn't, then the film would have been a different film. And I don't think it would have been as powerful as it is. But Brian has Brian is incapable of deceit. He's incapable of not opening up and revealing himself and being honest. His emotions are so close to the surface and so, I think, tangible for him, that when he does speak and when he does open, he doesn't have the ability to filter that. He doesn't, it's just right there on the surface for him. And he has a beautiful friendship, I think, with Jason. I read a review that I was really proud of, and the line would say that this film was as much about friendship as it was about music. And I loved that quote. I'm really proud of that, because that's the way I saw it too. I saw this film as just two buddies driving around, and when you're with your friends, you can talk about things maybe you wouldn't talk about, maybe even with your wife, or with your therapist or something. But when you're with your buddy, you feel close, you feel safe, and you don't always have to speak, right? If you're in your car with your buddy and you guys are on a road trip or something, you can go 30, 40 minutes and not say a word, and it's okay. You don't need to fill that gap with a friend. and that was a lot with Brian and Jason as well. So, but yeah, that was our goal, was with just no, you know, don't hurt, you know what I mean? Don't bring any
Yeah,
harm. And
yeah. I mean, the tough part was getting it out of Brian. Once he felt safe, you know, when he started to reveal this stuff, I just wasn't expecting it at all. I expected this film, honestly, to be a retrospective about the impact that he and the Beach Boys have made on culture and on the world generally. But it's so much more. It is a buddy movie. It's a road movie, and it's about so much mental health, friendship, and of course, his incredible talent. I'm curious, was it difficult, challenging to get so many of these great musicians and superstars like Elton John, Bruce Springsteen, Linda Perry to profess their admiration for him on screen? Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah, no, not at all. They were all really easy kids, actually. They were all pretty, everybody said yes right away. If there were some people we reached out to and we weren't able to get, but it was usually just, it was always just because of a scheduling issue. You know, I remember Billy Joel desperately wanted to do something, but he's on tour a lot. And so, you know, if it was anybody that we couldn't get, it was just simply because of scheduling. But one of the things that I decided to do kind of early on was I didn't want a lot of talking heads. I wanted to have, if I could, kind of a diverse list of artists that could speak on this. So, you know, Bruce Springsteen is an American icon, you know, who grew up, you know, not too much younger than Brian. Then you get, you know, then you get Elton John, who grows up, you know, thousands of miles away in the UK on the other side of the pond. Jim James, who is kind of a, you know, he's a guy to kind of the indie vibe, right? You know, that Grateful Dead, Dave Matthews crowd, that genre. You know, he's so revered in that. Nick Jonas, you know, Nick Jonas. I was looking for somebody who I thought, you know, of a younger generation who could speak to Brian, and the only one I could come up with was Nick. And I thought of Nick because here was a guy who started in a band with his two brothers when he was a teenager, making pop music. And now here he was in his 20s. He kind of had a setback as a solo artist where he wasn't received so well. So people struggled to accept his new sound. And I thought, you know what, man, that kid can absolutely identify with Brian. And Gustavo Dudamel, who's one of the world's most famous conductor, grew up in South America. And the idea was, you know, if you're kind of flipping through the channels and you saw this film and you said to yourself, Gustavo Dudamel, Nick Jonas, Elton John, what in the world could these people have in common? And the answer would be Brian Wilson. And that was the only answer it could be. But to answer, we were very fortunate when we did reach out. Everybody said yes. And I could have used everything everyone said. It breaks my heart sometimes. You know, you've probably talked about the Peter Jackson documentary, and you know he's got 6.5, 7 hours or whatever it is on Disney Channel, and it kills me. I'm like, I could have done 7 hours easily with this, and because everything Elton, Bruce, and those guys said is pretty remarkable. They all have an incredible passion for Brian's music.
Well, I think then, I mean, you must eventually release a director's cut on a streaming platform at some point in the future so that we can then take an even deeper dive. So maybe that might be coming in the future for you. Who knows, right?
That's absolutely. Let's put it out there in the universe.
Good. Put it out there. Positive. You know, music lovers will really appreciate how you deploy several unreleased gems from his career that have been rumored to exist, but never really heard. And one of those is Honeycomb. It's a highlight scene in the film where he decides to get on the piano and you just can see the machinery working. He knows every beat, every note so intimately, and he conducts the band like a maestro with such precision. It's a highlight, and it's a great example of his unique talent. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on how that scene came together?
No, it's one of the greatest days of my life. Actually, was that, and in particular those particular moments right there when he's recording Honeycomb, and it happens just like it does in the film. You know, that is almost real time what you're seeing there in that clip. It's almost real time, and as you see in the film, he's really nervous. And Brian always gets nervous. And he was nervous about going into the studio. He was always nervous about going into the studio. And, do I have it? Do I still have it? And he struggles with that. And he came in and he sat down and he just went right to work. And he fell into that zone and he started to direct his band. And you're right, you can see it in his eyes. You can see the wheels turning, and you can almost see him sing the song. It's remarkable for me. And I was there, I was watching the scene, I was standing back behind the camera operators, and I thought to myself, my God, this is what it was like in 1964. Because one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to have Brian record with his band in a big studio, which is not really done anymore. Nobody really records that way anymore. It's very expensive. Everybody kind of records it one instrument at a time, and Pro Tools and that kind of thing. But I know, and I respect that. That's technology. But I know I had, or at least had this instinct that Brian was going to connect with leading his band in the way that we covered it. And we were, again, fortunate enough to be able to do that. So we brought everybody in together. They're in there all together in this big, huge studio there in LA. And as I'm watching that scene unfold and Brian is directing his band, I start to think this is exactly what it was like in 1964 when he was recording God Only Knows or Good Vibrations. And he's just directing this. And I started to tear up. I started to tear up. And so I kind of did one of these things where you kind of, you don't want anybody to see you, and some wiping away a tear, like, something's in my eye. And I look over to my side and I see like a grip crying, and I see like my art director in tears. And it was just like all of us in that room, I think experienced and saw something remarkable. And it's a gift I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.
Wow, so fortunate to be able to witness something like that. It doesn't come around every day, we all know that. Let's talk about the song recorded specifically for the film, Right Where I Belong, which plays over the final parts of Long Promised Road. It's a gorgeous throwback to the best of the Beach Boys. It exhibits vulnerability and joy, which to me, they're the two things that I remember when I think back to their best tracks. It's real, it's honest. And I think that when I was making notes about the film, I was like, this is like a tonic. It's just what we needed at the end of the film to kind of just wrap it up in a nice bow. It's been nominated by the Hollywood Music and Media Awards. Talk us through that song. It's really special.
Yeah, it's an incredible moment to think that, Brian Wilson wrote a song for your movie. I mean, that is just a remarkable sentence, right? It's just, and you could put that on my tombstone, and done. So I had asked Brian, I said, Brian, I'd love to have a new song if you're up for it. I said, when you went into the studio, I said, you record whatever you want to record. I just want to capture your recording. I said, but if I did have one wish, it would be that you would write something new for the film, but not if you don't feel like it. And he came in and he had this beautiful melody that he had written, and he gave it to me on like a micro cassette. He still uses a micro cassette, and he places the micro cassette on top of his little, Casio keyboard at his house. And he, uses that old fashioned cassette, and he hands me this cassette. And that is and he hums along to it. So he plays and then he hums, and then it would stop, and then he'd work on it a little bit more, and then he'd come back on. And he gave this to me finished. While we were shooting in the studio, Brian was having a lot of back problems, and he was really down in his back, and he was in a lot of pain. And what we discovered was he was going to need back surgery. And as soon as we had finished Honeycomb, I think that day, like, the next day he went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, hey man, we've got to do back surgery on you. And he ended up actually having 2 surgeries. So in that process, I thought, okay, well, I've got to edit this film. I've got to get it ready. Brian's not going to be able to complete this song. So I said, well, I'm just going to use it as score. I'm just going to take this beautiful melody and I'm going to use it as score throughout the film. And I got talking to Jim James of My Morning Jacket, who appears in the film and sings with Brian on Long Promised Road. And I don't know, I just felt like Jim had a spiritual connection with Brian. And there was just something about him that reminded me of Brian. he's just kind of this free spirit and very spiritual. And, Jim just doesn't seem concerned about commercial aspects of the business. And it just reminded me so much of Brian. And so I was like, hey, Jim, I've got this song that Brian wrote, did the melody for, but he's not going to be able to do the lyrics for it. Would you be interested in trying? And he's like, I can't, I'd be crazy to say no. Absolutely. So I'm not exaggerating. I sent it to him at 9 p.m. I had it transferred to an MP3, sent it to him at 9 p.m. By 2 a.m., my phone dings. I received an email, and Jim sent me the demo of the song. And I just thought it was amazing. I couldn't believe how Jim's lyrics, and what Jim did brilliantly, I think, was he went back and he read some of the interviews Brian had given with Jason. And he used quotes like the opening one, I get nervous, I get scared a lot. And he would use Brian's own words, and he used those as lyrics. And then throughout the film. And I just was, I told Jim, I was like, this is remarkable. This is how we're going to end the film. And I waited, I think 7-8 months, I think, for Brian to recover. And then Brian came in and recorded his vocals. And I asked his people, Paul Mertens, his musical director, I said, I want Brian to sound vulnerable. I want Brian to sound real. I think it's real easy nowadays to sweeten, and you can flip a button and make anybody sound great. And I said, Brian's almost 80 years old, and he's coming out of this back pain and these back surgeries, and I would love it if he sound that way. Let's not touch his vocals. And so you'll hear his voice crack. You know what I mean? There's some notes that he doesn't hit, and that's on purpose. That was a very conscious decision to keep that. To keep the song as real as the film hopefully is.
That's right. It really works. And look, Brent, thanks so much for the film. Millions of people around the world hold the Beach Boys so dear to their heart. That voice, the tone, the feel, the authentic slice of Americana. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt so immersed in that world. So congrats on a great film, and good luck for future endeavors.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.